Greetings, friends. Forgive me for being late. Hey, hello, everyone.
Hello.
Nice to see you guys. Your beautiful faces. You're all alive. That's a good thing. Y'all, I need to print something real quick. I need about 30 seconds-ish. Give me 1 sec here. Okay, hang on. Okay, very excited about class today. I miss you guys. I hope everyone's well. Michael, good to see you. And I'm very excited about delving into St. Augustine today. Finally, we are actually going to be looking at and reading and discussing a medieval thinker. All the prolegomena is behind us now. Do y'all know what that word prolegomena means? If I can find the chat, I will write it. Prolegomena. It's a Greek word. Oops. Yeah, prolegomena. Do you see the LEG root? That's connected to like lexis or lecture. It means to speak. The way to say I speak in Greek is lego. Prolegomena is stuff that is said beforehand. It's like prerequisite type stuff. So all the prolegomena is behind us now, and we're going to delve into St. Augustine. But y'all, I wanted to do something real quick before we start, and that is I wanted to ask you guys, and I think we have 6 people on at the moment. There's a couple of people who aren't here. I hope they're okay. I wanted to give you a chance to boost your class participation grade a little bit. I wanted to ask for each of y'all, and Mirka, I owe you a grade, and also, and forgive me for that, it's been a crazy week, no? And Christian, I owe you a grade as well, don't I?
Yes, for the presentation or
Yeah.
something else. Oh, okay.
Yeah, y'all want me to tell you what your grades are right now?
Yes, I would love that. I'm not embarrassed at
with
all.
that or not? I shouldn't put you on the spot like that.
I'm not embarrassed.
I'm giving you both a 90, okay? I'm giving you both a 90, and you both did really well. So you'll probably do better than that on your paper. I predict that you will, but good job. And I will send you some comments. Forgive me for not doing that. I mean, I think that we all probably had a crazy week last week. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, here's what I want to do. I want to give you guys an opportunity to boost your class participation grade. And I would like you each, and this is before we delve into the confessions, mainly book 7. Although I might not be able to resist the temptation to just read the last paragraph of book 1 as well. And Mirka, did you see the special video that I made for you? Okay, good. I might not be able to resist the temptation to read the last paragraph of book 1, but we already talked a little bit about book 1. I didn't have a hardcore specific rigorous agenda for book 1. I just wanted to use book 1 as a way to whet our appetite and to sort of get used to St. Augustine, to experience the text as a prayer, and to sort of see some of his language, some of the themes, for example, the theme of desire. But anyway, before we delve into book 7, I want to give you guys an opportunity to say one thing that you've learned so far in this class. I'd love to know sort of the most interesting thing, and it can be anything just the most interesting thing that you've learned so far. It could be a big thing, it could be a little thing, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I would love it if you guys would just share something that you've learned so far in the semester. We've talked about Parmenides, we've talked about Heraclitus very briefly. We talked about Plato. We read a little bit about Plato's line from Book 6 of the Republic, and we talked about Aristotle's Metaphysics, Book 12, Chapter 7 of the Metaphysics, his deduction or development of the unmoved mover. We've talked about a lot. What have you learned? Can someone give me one or two things that you find interesting as we get ready to transition into Augustine?
I really enjoyed our discussion on Aristotle's unmoved mover. I'm also taking religious philosophy, and I've found a lot of like echoes with a lot of the people that were reading there, having a kind of background in Aristotle's conception of God helps at least me, helped me understand a lot of the readings that we did, especially when
In the
at
religious
least
philosophy class, you mean?
yes, yeah. Over there. I also at least one thing that I learned was that Aristotle is called like the philosopher. I thought that was pretty interesting, and I didn't know that before.
Awesome. So just a couple of things. First off, it's really yeah. Thomas Aquinas calls him the philosopher. Bonaventure might, I can't quite remember. But there's these huge Islamic philosophers, namely Averroes and Avicenna. I don't expect you to know those names, but basically before the Christians rediscovered Aristotle and Plato, the Muslims and actually the Jews, like a guy named Maimonides, had discovered him first. And that's probably because they had closer organic relationships to the Eastern world, especially places like Baghdad, which is really important in terms of the translation from Aristotle. Anyway, it's really Averroes and Avicenna who started calling Aristotle the philosopher. They were like in love with Aristotle. So yeah, Thomas Aquinas picks that up from them. By the way, he calls Averroes the commentator with a capital C. And so yeah, that's awesome, Mason. I want to say this. So you had my intro class, and Jacob is in it right now. And one of the things that I think is most important about the unmoved mover, there's really two things. One is the notion of divine simplicity, which I labor to show my students that really that comes from Parmenides. That's the first thing. God is not this, God is not that, God is not this. We see that in steroids in book 7 of the Confessions. But the other thing is this notion of thought thinking itself and how that is a recursive relationship or a reflexive relationship. It's not simply subjective. It's not simply objective. If I say, I see the cup, I am the subject, the cup is the object, I'm acting on the cup. But thought thinking itself is recursive. There's this reflexive, recursive relationship between the object and the subject that characterizes God in Aristotle's mind. And that is very important. And as you know, because you took my intro class, we see that pop up again with Descartes, except that with Descartes, it's now transferred to the register of the human being as opposed to the register of God. And that's very important for the development of modern thought. But yeah, good stuff. Thank you for that. Who else wants to go real quick before we delve into book 7 of the Confessions?
I can go. I would just like to say what I've found most interesting are the connections between the Hebrew faith and the Christian faith, really, I guess, non-pagan faiths. So the Muslims, Jews, and Christians, how much they pulled from the ancient Greek thinkers. I didn't realize they pulled so heavily from them, especially as you've explained, the connections between Parmenides, Heraclitus, and what Aristotle and Plato, how they run with those ideas and take them to create God out of those thinkers. So I didn't realize it was so heavily connected.
Yeah. Okay. So, Jacob, can you give an example of what you have in mind when you talked about the connections between Judeo-Christian and Muslim thought on the one hand and pagan thought on the other?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So Parmenides' idea of God and Heraclitus's view of God, in that I think it was Aristotle who has his spectrum, his metaphysical spectrum, and he takes half and half, the good halves, I suppose, from both of those two pre-Socratics, and he blends them. And then how we take Aristotle's fusion of those guys, and we kind of run with that in Christianity, Islam.
I see. So you're talking about how Christianity and Judaism and Islam assimilate Greek notions about God.
Yes, that's a very better way of saying it.
Yep. Amen. Yeah, good. And I do agree that you see the same thing in Jewish thought. But although that's not something that we've talked a lot about in this class, it's mainly Christian thought. I mean, yeah. Good. Thank you, Jacob. Who else would like to say something?
I'd like to add a little bit to that, actually. I was also kind of thinking in similar terms. It's interesting to know, or really kind of realize, how much Greek pagan ancient thought, how instrumental it was in really forming Christian doctrine. And one thing that I just keep I keep asking this, I keep finding myself asking this question, and that is, why does Augustine care about an ancient pagan Greek guy whose ideas seem to be just baseless assertions? So I'm starting
Namely Plotinus, right? Namely Plotinus.
Right. Well, and ultimately, like Plato, like, for example, like his works in Phaedo, when I first read them, they just seemed bewildering to me. But anyway, it's starting to get more clear, or the more I kind of play around with it, it's making a little more sense, or becoming less absurd, becoming more familiar. But another thing, I've been reading Confessions, book 12, and I've been trying to kind of examine Augustine's metaphysics. And one thing that I've learned, it's just kind of crazy to me, is that, you have, like, famously, up in the air realm of the forms, Plato. Then you have sort of this empiricist-esque, Aristotle, on the ground, with the painting. And then you have Augustine, and their metaphysics are quite similar. Now, they're not exactly the same, of course, but I'm reading some of, like, what is it, book 12, and, like, okay, there's sections like this where it's like, the further away from you things are, the more unlike you they become. And this is just like Plato's allegory. This is like his allegory of the sun, but he's saying this distance is not spatial. I think he even says, let's see here. He even says, this has the consequence that it never undergoes variation or change. Nevertheless, it is in principle. See, okay, this is in relation to heaven. And yeah, okay, so I guess there's so many things they're interesting in this chapter, but I guess the last thing I'll just talk about is his idea about this. Even though, from what I understand from what you said, he never read Aristotle, despite
except for the categories.
He did read some Aristotle, or
he read the categories. He explicitly talks about that somewhere.
Well, his
I feel like it's book 1 or 2. Anyway.
Well, his idea of he talks about something like prime matter, and that's really interesting to me. And so I've been kind of trying to analyze this, sort of this almost nothing, invisible and unorganized matter, and just kind of. But I mean, it's also very also really reminds me of Plato's forms, so it's like, now some differences, it seems like, where and also that's key to one of the differences between him and Plato, it seems, because this sort of almost nothing was created by God, and wasn't pre-God. And in fact, it's interesting, kind of like looking at also his theories on time, for example. But
so, hey, Michael, hang on real quick. I want to respond to some of this real quick. One is, yeah, that you're totally right that Augustine believes in creation ex nihilo.
Yeah.
Whereas all of the Greeks that precede him think, I don't know about Plotinus, but certainly Plato and Aristotle think that matter has existed in the past for an infinite amount of time. That's true. Now, I do want to just make sure you understand that Plato does believe in something called, that he does believe in something like prime matter. He doesn't use that phrase, but in the Timaeus, which by the way is there's only two works by Aristotle that all Christians had access to: the Categories and On Interpretation. Those are both logical works. The only work from Plato that everyone had access to the whole way through was the Timaeus, which is kind of like the creation story, Plato's version of the creation story, although it's not creation ex nihilo. But in the Timaeus, he does talk about something that's tantamount to prime matter. So you're right about that. You're just high five on that. Let me say a couple more things. So I hope that you realize, I think that you do, that the great Platon. So in book 7, you're talking about book 12, but today I'm going to lecture on book 7. And in book 7, it's all about the books of the Platonists, right? Platonists. I even think that's the title of the book. Although that might be something that Henry Chadwick supplies. I'm not quite sure. By the way, Henry Chadwick was an Anglican priest, kind of like I am. But in book 7, the great Platonist is Plotinus. Class, let me hear you say Plotinus.
Plotinus.
Good. And so that's why, like, most of the footnotes, this, by the way, is why I like the Chadwick translation, because he footnotes Plotinus over and over and over again. And let me say this, Michael, you're right. Something you said leads me to believe that you think that, well, I'm just going to put it like this. Plotinus is a Neoplatonist or just a Platonist, but all Neoplatonists drink Aristotle's Kool-Aid as well. And in fact, one good way to think about it, I think, is to say that Aristotle was the first Neoplatonist. When we talk about Neoplatonists, or to use Augustine's language, the Platonists, we're not giving a thumbs up to Plato again over and against Aristotle. No, no, no. We're talking about a tradition that assimilates both of them.
Okay, yeah.
And then in terms of like one of the first things you said, like how you think it's sort of baffling that Augustine would like give a high five to these wild, like brute statements. I love that you said that. I mean, because if you're thinking it, it's good to say it. And I can see why you would think it. However, that's precisely why I go back to Parmenides and Heraclitus. It's because, like, I would encourage you to ruthlessly pursue and examine the possibility that actually it's more rational than any other alternative. I mean, look, put it to you like this. I want to say two things. First off, the God of simplicity, the God that is simple. Now, are you with me so far, Michael?
Yes.
Okay. The God of simplicity, I would argue, is just more rational than, say, Zeus and Poseidon on the one hand. And then on the other hand, it's just more rational than some of the other pre-Socratics. I don't talk about this in my classes, but they're usually called like the Miletans. And it's people like Thales who said that everything is water. So some of the pre-Socratics before Heraclitus and Parmenides would say, oh, the one explanatory principle, the thing that can explain everything is water. that is not rational. It's actually more rational to say that there is a God of simplicity who's not spatially extended and doesn't change and doesn't get pissed off or jealous than it is to say that everything is water. I would argue. And we could say similar things about atomism, or I can't think of any other examples right now, but you know that there were ancient atomists. I would encourage you to relentlessly pursue the possibility and explore the possibility that maybe that view of things, that the God of simplicity is the ultimate explanatory principle, is actually more rational than any of the other alternatives. For example, more rational than materialism. So those are just some thoughts and reactions. But listen, good stuff. Do you want to say one or two more things before we pass the baton to Mirka and possibly Christian, although we may have lost him?
Yeah, I guess just that it's good to know that Augustine had some of. It's good to know definitively that Augustine had some of Aristotle's stuff. I wasn't clear on that, so
he says he doesn't like it. It's in the Confessions. He says that he read the categories. Does anyone know? Is it in book 1? No, it's not in book 1. I feel like it's before book 7. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You could Google it.
Yeah.
And he doesn't. He says that he's not impressed with it, but he did read it. But listen, here's the thing that you have to understand. It doesn't really matter if they read this or that dialogue, this or that Aristotelian treatise. They still knew it because those texts were mediated by other texts. So, for example, Plotinus. Plotinus is always quoting Plato and Aristotle.
Okay, well that also helps a lot. That makes it a lot more clear. See, I was thinking that I guess I was kind of thinking along the lines of what was kind of miraculous to me, and I guess this new information doesn't diminish this entirely, but simply put, you have 3 guys that kind of arrive at the same conclusion from different angles.
Oh yeah, no. Augustine's definitely working within a tradition.
Yeah.
And he calls that tradition Platonism.
Right. And I think I had some sense of that, but I was unclear on how all this fit together.
Yeah. That's why we take medieval philosophy classes. So one day at a time, good stuff.
Yeah. Just FYI, it's book 4. He mentions the categories.
Good. Do you have a section number for Michael?
Is it the Roman numeral numbers?
Yeah.
It'd be XVI, so 16, section 16.
Great. Yeah. So you'll want to look at that, Michael.
Okay, awesome.
Cool. Mirka, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm good. Just thinking.
Yeah.
I guess mine would be like one of the first days, and I remember I sent you a message about it. It was essence versus existence.
Yeah.
I could never get that out of my head. I was still trying to process it after.
Did I respond to your email?
You told me to ask again in class, but I never did.
Oh no. Do you want to ask now?
I mean, I could just read the kind of like the message I sent you.
Yeah. Go for it.
I'm sorry, but I'm still thinking about the question you asked earlier about essence and existence versus existence. To my understanding, you were trying to say that we humans created God for the need for can you speak for the need of faith. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. That was my.
Awesome. Thank you. So yeah, I mean, I didn't mean to suggest that we create God out of some need. There have been people who have thought that, and I'm open to that thought. I wasn't trying to say that. So yeah, I'm not sure what to say on that front. Yeah, but I mean, I think that what's like the important thing is to try to distinguish in your mind 2 different things. The fact that the pen exists versus what a pen is. And if you want to know what a pen is, you need the definition. And now I'm going to freak y'all out and bust out the Webster's dictionary that I had, I think, in high school. But like we could look up the word pen, right, and find a definition in there. And that's the essence. But just because you can look up a definition or find the essence of an object doesn't necessarily mean, I think, at least it doesn't necessarily mean that the thing exists. So for example, I wonder if the word unicorn is in the dictionary. I'll bet it is. But most people would say that unicorns don't exist. Right? So if you can have a definition of a unicorn or a UFO, and yet you think that that doesn't exist, that necessarily means there's a difference or a distinction between essence on the one hand and existence on the other. Does that make sense?
So it's kind of like thinking of how we label what's good and bad.
Well, I don't think it has anything to do with good and bad, or at least I haven't said anything about
Oh,
good
like the
and
way
bad.
like we see, like for some people something's good, for some people something's like bad. The same thing is bad. So that would be kind of like essence and existence, like what confuses me, like the point of God, like whether some people believe he exists because
Yes.
of essence.
Yes.
But like
Well,
me,
now check this out though. So, okay, that's awesome, Mirka. So here, what's crazy, and this is what makes things like philosophy and theology really hard. What's crazy is that everything I just said about the pen, how its existence is different from its essence, are you with me so far? Doesn't apply to God. And I'll come back to that in a moment. I want to come back to that in a moment. Let me say right now that, and by the way, according to whom? Well, according to the thinkers that we're looking at in this class. I would say according to Parmenides, according to Plato and Aristotle, according to Augustine and all of the medievals, they would say, actually, that you cannot find a dictionary definition of God. Pretend like this dictionary is like philosophically airtight, right? Like it's totally perfect. It's inerrant. It's infallible. It's a perfect dictionary. There's no mistakes in it. It's 100% accurate. All of those thinkers would say that actually you cannot find an adequate definition of God in the dictionary. And one of the reasons why, Mirka, is because if you think about what all these thinkers are saying about God, it's pure negation. Not this, not that, not this, not that, not spatially extended, not consisting of parts and wholes, not admitting of change, in other words, something that doesn't change, et cetera, et cetera. That's not a definition. Definitions say something positive or affirmative. They affirm something. They don't just negate something. So for example, Aristotle's definition of the human being is rational animal. Notice there's no negations in that. That's a positive statement. In fact, it even involves things like genus and species, right? Animal is a genus. None of that applies to God for the thinkers that we're talking about in this class. And so, yeah, the reason you can distinguish the pen's existence from its essence is that it has a definition. You can look up pen in the philosophically airtight dictionary and you can learn that definition. And then you can ask the question, okay, does it really exist? You can do that for pens. You can do that for unicorns. You can do that for UFOs. You can do that for human beings, according to Aristotle. But you can't do it for God. So I know it's crazy and I know it's difficult and hard and fucking crazy. But in a way, the whole reason I rehearse this issue of essence versus extinction of existence is to then later say that none of it applies to God, because that's how unique God is. For these thinkers, not in my opinion, but for Augustine, for Plotinus, etc. God does not have a definition. Put it like this, Mirka, our minds are too finite and puny to understand God. God is infinite. God is beyond our understanding. That's one reason why the distinction between essence and existence does not apply to God. I want to give you another reason. It's because God exists necessarily for these thinkers. See, the pen might not exist. That's the whole point of the distinction between essence and existence. It might not exist. A unicorn might not exist. But guess what? God necessarily exists for these thinkers. So yeah, I hope that did more good than harm, Mirka, and keep thinking about it. You want to say anything about what all I just said?
No, it's just, I feel like I got kind of confused in that, like, it doesn't apply to God.
It doesn't apply to God precisely because there is no definition of God. Here's the point. God is not a thing in the world. MacBooks are a thing in the world. iPhones are a thing in the world. Thanos in the Marvel universe is a thing in the world. He's the strongest thing, but he's still a thing in the world. Why do I say that? It's because he has parts and wholes. He's made out of material composition. But God is not like that. God isn't a thing in the world. You cannot point to God. According to Augustine, according to Parmenides, you can't point to God. You can't see God. You can't measure God on a ruler. You can't define God. So you see, God is not a thing in the world. That is why this distinction of essence versus existence as two different things, as distinct, does not apply to God, because he's not a thing in the world. That distinction only applies to things in the world. Keep coming back, okay? Christian, do you want to say anything? Is Christian with us?
Can you hear me right now?
Yeah, do you have anything you want to say in terms of anything you've learned this semester so far in this class?
Okay. So dang, I should have gotten something ready. Sorry, I was driving.
No, it's all good, man. I mean, just if there's anything that you found that's interesting or confusing or something that made the light bulb go on, anything at all.
Well, back to Augustine.
Yeah.
I just what is still confusing to me, but I just found intriguing was his idea of like time and how it's different for God and for us.
Oh yeah.
Like, in the sense of God doesn't have a time.
Yeah. Well, and that's connected to what I was just talking about when I said that. I mean, in other words, that's connected to God's simplicity, right? Because one of the things that it means to say that God is simple is that God does not undergo change. That is to say, God does not undergo temporal experience. Do you think it's possible to be in time and not changing at all?
Be in time and not changing at all?
Yeah.
Well,
I don't think it's possible.
Yeah, I was going to say no, at least for everything in our existence.
And there have been thinkers like this dude Avicenna, who I mentioned a minute ago, who liked to talk about the heavenly bodies, like the stars. This gets a little bit complicated, but heavenly bodies, like I'm just going to say planets and stars, they wanted to say that they were eternal. And they wanted to say that because they move in perfect circles. Have we talked about circles in this class? I can't remember. Have we talked about how important circles are for these pre-modern thinkers?
No,
I don't know.
think so.
Yeah, I think we have
Oh, we
actually.
have? Okay.
I think we did a little bit, but I can't really remember where. But
We
but
talked about it with either Aristotle or Plato's line or metaphysics. It was in one of those two.
okay, good. So I think it was Aristotle's metaphysics. So there have been people, Christian, who wanted to say that the heavenly bodies are sort of like they're eternal. They're as close to God as you can get. And so maybe you could want to say that they don't change, even though they exist in time. But check it out. Do they change location? Do the heavenly bodies change location? Yes, they do. Are you with me, Christian?
Sorry, I didn't realize I hadn't mute myself. I was talking, but yes, I'm with you. 'Cause
Yeah, so I think that it follows from God's simplicity that God does not undergo time. God does not experience time. God is not temporal. I think.
You know, I just thought about something.
Yeah.
So this is like not having to do with the philosophy of Augustine, but
Okay.
so I remember just this one question. This religious philosophy question is, can God change his mind?
Yeah.
So if God is unchanging and all that,
Yeah.
can he change his mind? Because like one thing that was
No.
oh sorry, what was that?
No.
He cannot change his mind?
Correct.
Yeah.
And so then what do you do with the biblical language that says God changed his mind? Because that's in the Bible. By the way, listen, Jacob, does the Bible ever say that God has a mighty hand and an outstretched arm? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, it does. And yet what I've been saying the whole time is that C.S. Lewis, Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, they don't think that God literally has an arm. Are you with me?
Doesn't it say that men are made on his?
Okay, hang on real quick. Hang on. Don't lose your thought. I just want to wrap this up with Christian. Christian, what I'm trying to say is the Bible is interpreted in special ways that deal with the biblical language of God changing his mind, like in the book of Jonah. But it's no different than saying that God has a strong arm and a mighty hand.
Oh, okay. I see. Yeah. That makes sense since a lot
All right.
of the Bible doesn't like make literal sense.
That's right, especially for Augustine. And especially the Old Testament, what Christians call the Old Testament. Yeah, that's right. So I can't talk about that anymore today. Mirka, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying, like, doesn't he? That's what confuses me. Like, they say God has no form or shape, but then I believe in Genesis it says that men were created on his image, and then
yes, they're created in God's image. Yes.
So does he look like a man? Does he not have a shape?
The whole question is, what does that mean, right? And you know, but Mirka, whatever it means, for the vast majority of Christians and Jews and Muslims, it does not mean that God has, it doesn't mean that you can see God. And by the way, it might be that a better way to translate that would be that the human being, AKA man, is God's image, not is in God's image, but is God's image. So that you are God's image. Mason is God's image. The invisible God that has no form or shape or spatial extension or body, you are his image. Yeah. But it doesn't mean that God has that you can see God. Yeah. Okay, y'all, let's delve into book 7 of the Confessions, shall we? I'm very tempted to read the last paragraph of book 1. Let me just glance at it and see if I can resist the temptation. Yeah, I'm going to resist the temptation. Just remember that book 1 has a lot to do with Augustine's infancy, his childhood, even when he was in the womb. Yeah. So it's like the beginnings of his autobiography. Remember, the Confessions is many things, right? But one of the things that it is Augustine's autobiography, especially books 1 through 9. Okay. All right, y'all, I'm going to share my screen with you. We're going to delve into book 7. What I would like to do, and I have about 20, 25 minutes. I probably won't succeed, but I'd like to sort of get through book 7 today and then do book 12 tomorrow. Let me say a couple of things before I forget. Housekeeping. Number 1, your paper deadline is extended a week. Yeah, I don't care when your paper was due, it's extended a week. Okay. Also, I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, yeah. Next Monday, I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about the paper. Okay. Is next Monday spring break? No, I don't think it is. I was going to do that during the snowpocalypse, but everything was pushed back. I will do that on Monday. I didn't want to do it today because I wanted to talk about Augustine. We got to get into this stuff. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, we will do that on Monday. We'll talk about the paper on Monday. If you have any questions, please ask them. But then also, whenever your due date for the paper was, and also if you haven't presented yet, your presentations, knock it back a week. Okay. Everything is delayed a week, unless it's like on the last day. And then I don't know what I'm going to do yet. Okay. So we'll talk more about that next Monday. But now look with me. Can you see the outline of the Confessions? This is a very simple outline. I have 2 actually. But can you all see this? Y'all can see that, right?
Yes.
Great, thanks. Okay. So I wanted to read it twice. I didn't get around to reading it twice. I just read it once. Book 7. Man, it's so good. It's so good. It's so there's so much in there. I kind of feel like I had a little epiphany and I was like, oh, he's doing 4 things in this book. So I wrote them down. Number 1, he learns the truth of the immaterial. Now, what I mean by that is that's a quote from near the end of the entire book 7, Roman numeral 2026. 2026 in my version of Chadwick, that is page 129 at the very bottom. By the way, he repeats himself a lot, which is a good thing, right? But at 2026, he says, and this is at the bottom of page 129 of Chadwick, at that time, after reading the books of the Platonists and my learning from them, to seek for immaterial truth. Okay? To seek for immaterial truth. That is what he learned from the Platonists. And I think that that's shorthand. That's shorthand for all of the things that he discusses near the end, I'm going to say in the first half of book 7, namely, well, let me just read. He learns the truth of the immaterial from the Platonists. Okay. The books of the Platonists thus saved him from the errors of Manichaeism. Now, let me hear you say Manichaeism.
Manichaeism.
Good job. I'm not going to test you on that. If you go on and study things like philosophy or theology, you will hear that term over and over again. But what I want you to know is these 2 things. The Manichaean, in other words, the errors that Augustine thinks that the Platonists saved him from There's two of them. That God is spatially extended. That's one. That's an error that he says the Platonists saved him from. And two, that there is some other substance equal with God. Okay? Those are the two errors that he explicitly says, this was my view, but then the Platonists helped me. The Platonists changed my mind. That's what he says. Okay? So that's the first thing that he does in book 7, is he narrates his epiphanies that were prompted by the Platonists. Okay? Now look with me here at this footnote 1 at the bottom. I hope you can see that. The immateriality of God, or the truth of immateriality, the truth of the immaterial, again, I think that that's shorthand for lots of things that he talks about, and I'm just going to list some of them right here at footnote 1. This includes many insights and truth, all narrated in book 7. For example, that being is good, that being is good. That's one thing. That being is good. This is something that he talks about in book 7, and he says that the Neoplatonists convinced him that this is the case. Being is good. So have you ever, like, I don't know, have you had a friend commit suicide? I hope not. Have you ever thought about suicide? I have. I'm not, yeah, I mean, I think it's good to think about suicide. I don't mean that I think that it's good to contemplate killing yourself, but I think it's good to ask questions about suicide. Maybe you've seen that Netflix series from a couple of years ago. What was it called? 13 Ways to Die, something like that. I don't really remember. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, suicide. It's a big topic, right? Maybe you saw the movie Bird Box. Bird Box? Is that what it was called? Bird Box. Yeah, crazy. And maybe you've asked the question, is it better to exist or not to exist? Can you see how that's relevant to the issue of suicide? Well, Augustine says, following the Neoplatonists, that it's better to exist than not to exist. Being is good for Augustine, okay? And that's one of the things that he learned from the Neoplatonists. A second thing is the privation theory of evil. We're going to get to that. This notion of evil and bad stuff in the world is really just a lack of the good. Now, probably not all of you are going to like that. We'll get there soon. But that's the second, that's an example of a second thing that he says he learned from the Neoplatonists. Not just that being is good, but the privation theory of evil. This idea that what is evil? It's just a lack of good. Do y'all know what a parasite is? What's a parasite? Who can tell me what a parasite is?
It's like an organism that has no benefit to the host.
Yeah, it has no benefit for the host, and it derives all of its energy and nourishment from the host. Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, it lives on borrowed capital. It lives, its whole existence is derivative. It can't live on its own. It has to suck the energy out of some host. Yeah. Augustine is saying that's how evil is. Put it like this. Evil is kind of like the dark. What is dark? It's an absence of light. Evil is the absence of good. So this is the privation theory of evil. We'll come back to it, I hope. Number 1, that being is good. Number 2, the privation theory of evil. And number 3, the incorruptibility of God. These are just 3 examples that came to my little pea brain of some of the things that Augustine says he learned from the Neoplatonists, which he summarizes as the truth of the immaterial. Now, let me say one more thing before I go on to Roman numeral 2. Y'all, here's one of the main points, okay? All of this stuff is before he's converted to Christianity. Are you with me? He's not a Christian yet when he's learning this stuff about the Neoplatonists. In fact, what Augustine thinks is that he thinks that Platonism is like a stepping stone on the way to Christianity. Okay, I hope you realize that. I hope that you got that from the reading. In Augustine's mind, Neoplatonism is one of the things that God used to bring him to Christ. Because you can't be a Christian if you think that God has a body. And you can't be a Christian if you think that there's two gods, yin and yang, whatever. No, if you're a Christian, you have to say that there's one God and he is supreme. Okay? So I hope you can see that in Augustine's mind, this is what he says in book 7, the books of the Neoplatonists are like a stepping stone to Christianity. And so, Jacob, you talk about a blending of pagan thought and Christian thought. Wow. This is probably the best example, or maybe not the best example, but the most explicit example of this that you could possibly find. Because Plotinus, aka Neoplatonism, is pagan 99%. We don't have time. It actually is the case that Plotinus was probably influenced by Christianity and even the doctrine of the Trinity, but we don't have time to talk about that in this class. So we're just going to assume that Plotinus is 100% pagan. And so, yeah, this is Augustine borrowing. He's standing on the shoulders of Neoplatonism in order to get a good glimpse of God. And in this way, he's pillaging the Egyptians. He's pillaging the Egyptians. I have to talk about that real quick before I go to Roman numeral 2. Y'all, you've probably heard of the book of Exodus. Maybe you've even read it. I hope you have. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. These are the 5 books of Moses. That gets back to another discussion that Christian and Mirka were having in their little presentation about why would Augustine want to talk to Moses? Yeah, it's because he thought that Moses wrote the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, the Jewish Torah. But in the Exodus story, in the book of Exodus, remember how God rescues the children of Israel? He takes them out of Egypt and they cross the Red Sea into the promised land. Well, do you remember that part where God says to the Lord says to the Egyptians, hey, I want you to the Egyptians are going to give you a bunch of jewelry and gold and precious stones. And you're going to take that stuff. You're not stealing it because they're giving it to you, but you're going to take that stuff out of Egypt. And did that piss off the Pharaoh? You better believe it did. So in that sense, they did steal it, I guess. But they took it with them across the Red Sea. And you remember what they used that stuff for? The gold, the precious stones. You remember what they used that stuff for?
Make an idol.
No, they did not use it for that. Now, I mean, it's kind of complicated, but, and by the way, maybe I'm wrong. I think I don't, but I'm going to say no, that's not what they used it for. They used it for the tabernacle. Okay. Or at least let's put it this way. That's what they were supposed to use it for. And they did use it for. Now, maybe some of it got used to make an idol, the golden calf, maybe. But in general, it was used to make the tabernacle. It was used to make the house of the Lord. Okay. So what's going on there? What's going on there is that God's people are borrowing stuff from the non-Christians, from the pagans, from the heathens, and they're using it for the purposes of God. Are you with me? That's what Augustine thinks he's doing. He thinks that he's pillaging the Egyptians. The Egyptians in this case is whom?
The Greeks, the Plato, Aristotle.
That's right, and Plotinus. He's pillaging them. He's taken their truth and employing it in service of what he would say is the gospel. The gospel, the truth about the God-man, the truth about Jesus Christ. Okay, so he's pillaging the Egyptians. He talks about that. We might get to that in a minute. Look with me at Roman numeral 2. This is huge. Augustine even has an experience. Underline that word experience. He has an experience of some kind of bliss when he sees God's invisible nature. Okay, y'all, have you ever practiced yoga? Have you ever watched a movie about Buddhist monks? Are you familiar with the idea, with the notion of meditation and how monks, Buddhist monks, Christian monks, they engage in a practice of contemplation? Are you with me so far? Now, there's a lot that I don't have time to talk about right now, but what I want to say is this: when those monks are doing that, if you were to interview them and say, hey, what's going on when you meditate? Dalai Lama, let's take the Dalai Lama as an example. What's going on when you meditate, Dalai Lama? He would say, oh, I'm having an experience. I'm experiencing something. It's not just concepts. It's not just that he's thinking about something. He thinks that he's experiencing something. Are you with me? See, there's a difference between abstract thought on the one hand and experiencing something on the other. Roman numeral 2, Augustine thinks that he has an experience of something when he, quote, sees God's invisible nature, close quote. Now, I wanted to say something to Mason, but I think Mason, sorry, not Mason, forgive me. Who's my other friend?
Michael.
Michael, you're not with us, are you, Michael? No, I left. Okay, bye, Michael. I wanted to say something to Michael, because he talked about the forms like being kind of stupid or unbelievable. Okay. But in this context where Augustine has this experience, I'm highlighting it right here. It's section 2723. He talks about light, the light of reason. What Augustine wants to say is things like this. And we're going to see this when we get to Bonaventure. Augustine thinks that things like the law of non-contradiction, for example, A is not non-A. Are you with me so far? Like the pen is not the pen. The pen is not identical to the glasses or the iPhone. These are rules of logic. Are you with me? Rules of logic. And what Augustine thinks is that this is some kind of intellectual light. You cannot think without the light of reason being present in your mind. Okay, now we'll talk more about this as we go. I call this divine illumination theory, divine illumination theory. But what Augustine is saying in Roman numeral 2 is that he experienced it. He had some kind of experience. And that's a big deal, and it's different from abstract thought, just thinking about something. Okay, thinking about a geometric proof. That's different. All right, now, Roman numeral 3. But he finds that he's too weak to maintain this experience of bliss, to enjoy it, to enjoy God, to enjoy his vision of God. He says that he's too weak, he's too dark, he's too unstable. By the way, underline that word unstable. Do you realize how many times in this class have we talked about how things that don't change are better or superior to things that do change? Are you with me? Is that not what Parmenides says? Does not Parmenides say that being is real precisely because it doesn't change. Well, what Augustine's saying here is that he himself changes. He's too unstable, too weak, too dark, too full of anxiety, too sinful to maintain or to enjoy this bliss. Okay? Now, I'm going to talk for about, I promise this class will be over in the next 5 minutes. But y'all, I want to say something real quick. I just got done saying that there's a difference between abstract thought on the one hand and experiencing something in the first person on the other, right? I want you, now, who can remind me of Aristotle's definition of the human being?
Rational animal.
Rational animal. Now, when Aristotle defines the human being as a rational animal, what he thinks he's doing is articulating the essence / definition. Are you with me, Mirka? Articulating the essence / definition of the human being for the purposes of scientific, I want to say scientific manipulation, but manipulation is probably not the best word. He's identifying the essence of the human person for scientific purposes. He's treating the human person as an object of scientific study. That's what I'm trying to say. When he defines the human being as a rational animal, he is identifying the human being as an object for scientific study. All right? Now, what Augustine is doing in book 7 of the Confessions is saying that's bullshit. What Augustine is saying in book 7 of the Confessions is you can't treat the human person as an object of scientific study. What Augustine is saying is that I am not an object. I am a bundle of desires. I am someone who has feelings. I am a subject. You can't measure my soul. That's actually how Bonaventure says it. You can't measure my soul. Can you measure you know, there's some sort of a robot on Mars right now, and they're going to measure stuff, right? They're going to pick up rocks and they're going to measure them. That's cool, but you can't measure my soul, Augustine says. You can put chemicals in a test tube and manipulate them, but you can't put my heart in a test tube, Augustine is saying. So you see, what Augustine is doing here is he's gesturing toward what you might call philosophical existentialism. He's saying that the human person is problematic. Is an H2O molecule problematic? No, you can put it in a test tube and study it. But the human person is problematic. It's not an object of scientific study, Augustine wants to say. That's what he's saying in book 7. First, he says, I have this experience of bliss, but I'm too weak. I can't maintain that permanence. I can't maintain my grasp of Parmenidean being, you might say. I'm too weak. I'm too unstable. All right? I think that's, y'all, it's really important, okay? No one talked like this before Augustine, except for maybe the psalmist, except for maybe the Bible, maybe St. Paul, but in terms of the Greek philosophical legacy, no one ever talked this way before. Augustine's the first one to channel this spirit of existential angst, okay? Look with me at Roman numeral 4, and then I got to stop. the solution to this problem for Augustine. What problem? The problem that he's too unstable, the problem that he has anxiety, the problem that he's lustful and that he sins and that his emotions come and go and are blown and tossed by the wind. The solution to that problem, he says, is found in Scripture, apparently especially St. Paul, and especially the humility and weakness of God. That's what he says. If you read book 7, you read that. So y'all, there's all of these things that Augustine picks up from the Platonists. He picks up what they're putting down, but there's other things that he says, oh, I did not find this in the books of the Platonists. He says, I found this, check. I found this, check. I found this, check. But here's a list of things that I did not find in the books of the Neoplatonists. And the main thing is humility, the humility and the weakness of God. And the paradigmatic example of that in Augustine's mind is that God became man, that God became flesh in the incarnation, la incarnación. God became a baby that pooped in his pants, that needed milk from his mother's breast, that God became an animal. That's humility. And Augustine is saying the Platonists would never talk like that. Okay? Only the Jewish legacy would talk that way. That's what Augustine's saying. So what you have in book 7, and I'm going to close like this, is you have a bunch of stuff about the Greek philosophical legacy that we've talked about, but you also have, and I know it sounds weird, but it is a Jewish instinct to say that God became man. Now, the Jews were livid whenever people said that Jesus was God incarnate. Yes, they were livid, but it's still a Jewish idea, because at least in the opinion of Augustine, because what Augustine wants to say is that you can find the incarnation in the Old Testament. Okay? Now, y'all, I got to close. I hope that this has been helpful. I had a whole nother handout. I will put these on Canvas. I'll do that right after I log off. But we're going to discuss book 11 next class, and we're going to do it just like we did this. So I hope that you'll press on in book 11. And yeah, I will see you next time, okay? Peace.
Thank you.
Y'all take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.